In Office 365. My name is Scott Schnoll. I'm a Senior Program Manager on the Office 365 Customer Experience team. And among other things, my team works with security and compliance. So we work a lot with eDiscovery, with auditing, with regulators, and with the whole technologies as well. The agenda for this is pretty straightforward. It's almost the same as the title. We'll talk first a little bit about eDiscovery, and then we'll move on to archiving and hold. So eDiscovery. So within Office 365, we have several sets of tools that are grouped into one of these three areas. They're either designed to keep the data you want, such as the hold features that we have, delete the data you don't want, such as the data governance features, and then searching to find the data that you need. When we talk about keeping the data that you want, one of the primary differences between the way in which we preserve data within Office 365 versus using a third-party tool is we preserve the data in place. That's one of the reasons you'll hear us refer to things like in-place hold, is to reinforce the fact that the data that we are preserving remains in place wherever it lives. That could be email in someone's mailbox, that could be files and documents on a SharePoint site, or that could even be searching through content on a file share somewhere. The holds themselves are customizable. We've got several different types. You can use a query-based hold. In other words, do a search that comes up with the search results of data and then put just that data on hold or any data that meets that criteria. We also have time-based hold so that you could take a hold and set it for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 7 years, or really whatever time that you prefer, including indefinite hold. And then there's the old style of litigation hold or legal hold where you're just preserving everything forever or until you go in and manually remove the hold. What's different now is that the holds apply across multiple products. When we first started with things like in-place hold, it was really just preserving exchange data immutably. But now we've actually moved beyond that to include SharePoint data, and then any of the Skype for Business data or link data that is held in people's mailboxes as well. What's so interesting about the hold is that the end user who's on hold may or may not even know that they're on hold. The organization has tools that they can use to notify a user that they've been placed on hold, but it's up to the organization to do that. And there may be situations where you want to do that and situations where you don't want to notify the user. If you do notify the user, then, say for instance, they're in Outlook, the information will just appear in the Outlook Backstage page. That's the page that you get when you click on File in Outlook. It'll say you've been placed on hold, and you have the ability to include a URL so that they can click on to maybe go to your internal compliance website. Or you don't need to notify that they're on hold, in which case the user has no idea. So they will continue doing what they have been doing with email, creating messages, deleting messages, editing messages, and so forth. And the whole time they may not have any idea that they've been placed on hold. For deletion, just like hold, we give you the ability to do data governance through time-based deletion. So you could create a policy that says, keep all messages for 1 year or for 3 years or whatever time period you want, and thereafter those messages will expire out of the system. You don't have to use data governance. It's something that's there and available for you if you do need to. And then the third area is the searching. So we use a single search engine across all of Office 365 and for on-premises across the on-premises server-based workloads. That's called Search Foundation. And so as an example, there's a federated search API that we use between the services. And that means that if you're doing an eDiscovery search, for example, from SharePoint, you can search Exchange mailboxes. And SharePoint will actually get the data from the content index that the mailbox database has created. It won't have to go and re-index or recrawl the data. Again, because we're using a single search engine between the two of them. We also give you the ability, if you're searching this information to be produced as part of an eDiscovery request, we give you the ability to also do deduplication as well. So once you get your result set, if you search 10 mailboxes and they all had the same message in them, you can include just one message in that result set instead of all 10. And then we do give you the ability to do case management and to export the results as well, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. So in terms of, in terms of eDiscovery and why it's so important, these are some statistics from the United States. So of course the data might be a little different here in Europe. But within the US itself, generally at any given time, about 90% of all companies are involved in some form of litigation. And really large companies, those that are worth $1 billion or more, those have an average of 147 lawsuits that are ongoing concurrently at any given time. So Microsoft falls into that category. We're obviously worth more than $1 billion. And as you might imagine, as a result of being a large multinational global company, that we have active litigations going at all times. And per case, the average cost of eDiscovery, and this is just the eDiscovery part, not defending or prosecuting the whole case. Just for the eDiscovery part, it's an average of about $1 million US dollars per case. So when you average in 147 cases per year at $1 million just for the eDiscovery portion, right there, that's almost 150 million US dollars just for eDiscovery every single year. So we can kind of get a sense as to why it's important to have the appropriate tools that can allow you to really reduce the costs from this. So let's talk about the process. So whether you use our process or not, or whether you use our tools or not, the actual eDiscovery process is the same. It's these 4 steps, starting with the identify and preserve and going all the way down to production. The idea here is you're trying to reduce the amount of volume of data that you're producing, while at the same time increase the relevance of the data that's being produced as well. So really you want to just search for just that data that meets the criteria of the eDiscovery request or the subpoena or the court order or whatever's compelling you to produce this information in the most efficient way as possible. So identify and preserve, this is the initial, this is the first stage where an organization will be searching for the information that needs to be produced and at the same time preserving that information by, if necessary, placing it on hold. And that could be very important because if your company is served with a subpoena or a discovery request and you produce a bunch of information related to that request, but you delete information related to that request without producing it, there can be some very serious and grave consequences for your company if you do that. So it's not just important just to search for the data, you also need to preserve the data as well. So we give you a single tool that can do both. You do the search and the hold in one query. The next is the searching and processing, and this is where you take the data that initially came back and you have your in-house lawyers and your in-house paralegals go through it to cull and reduce the amount of data that you would end up delivering to a court or to opposing counsel. Then the review stage, that's when perhaps outside counsel comes in and further reduces the amount of data that is being delivered to the court or, again, to opposing counsel. And then the last step would be to produce the data using whatever means is appropriate to your jurisdiction. So that can mean transmitting data in the electronic discovery records management format, or that can mean producing raw data like PST files or MHT files or other native Office file formats. All right, so let's talk about search and why it's so important. I mentioned earlier that we've got a new search engine inside of Office 365 and indeed also the 2013 versions of SharePoint and Exchange and our other products. That's called Search Foundation. So now that all of Office is unified on a single search platform, which itself is part of Office as well, we have the ability to use APIs, again, say for example from SharePoint, into the catalog, the content index that was created by Exchange, and have searches done against that without having SharePoint having to recrawl each mailbox by itself. And of course, if there are things that the content index could not index, that will be recognized by SharePoint or whatever eDiscovery tool that you're using in Office 365, so that things that are non-indexable, something that might be encrypted or password protected, those can also be returned as part of the discovery request as well. So it's real time. You don't have to wait for a crawl or for indexing to complete, because indexing is continuous within Office 365. So everything is always up to date. And with the proximity searches and the rich syntax that you get from keyword query language, which is the language that you'll use for discovery searches, you are able to really just hone in on just that information that is most interesting and most relevant to the discovery request. And then when you do the query, you get statistical results back. And those results tell you things like how many items were in each person's mailbox that met the query results, what's the size of the items, and so forth. And we do that before we return the data to you. So that gives you an opportunity to further refine your search if it looks like too much data is being returned. So as an example, if you're doing a search for the Contoso project, and you're only expecting maybe a few items and maybe just maybe a couple hundred megabytes of data to come back, but you do a search and it comes back with thousands and thousands of items and gigabytes of data, you now have the ability to refine that search so that you can further hone in on just what you're looking for. Yes, you are able to search on sender, recipient, date. Yes, any language that is supported by Office 365, you can search in that language. The language will largely be dictated by the user interface. So when you sign up, if you set a specific language, that will be the language that you get for both the eDiscovery Center in SharePoint and the eDiscovery features in Exchange, and the new Office 365 Compliance Center in the Office 365 Admin Center as well. Now, exporting. So when you do the search, and after you've refined it and you have your search results and you're actually getting the data, at this point, we don't have a specific tool to allow you to export the data in a format that will work in every jurisdiction. The fact of the matter is every court in every country is different, and they all have different needs for discovery purposes. We do support, though, EDRM. That's the Electronic Discovery Records Model, and that is a standard within the U.S. and some other countries, and basically any jurisdiction that supports EDRM, we have the ability to take the data and export it into that format for you. When you get the data, you're getting it offline. You're extracting it from the system. But when you do so, it's coming in its native format. So as an example, when you have search results from an Exchange mailbox, those are stored in a PST file. When you have search results from a SharePoint, those are stored in web archive files, or MHT files as they're sometimes called. When you get information from the file system, that is in its native format. So when someone is looking at the data that's been returned, it's in exactly the same format. You've got full fidelity, full functionality. You can open up the PST files in Outlook. In fact, Outlook is a great tool for reviewing the data before it's produced. You can open up the SharePoint libraries in the MHT file in any web browser, and everything looks and acts and feels and behaves exactly like it does in the live system, because we're returning this data to you in its native format. So I mentioned keyword query language. Here's a couple examples that we have here. It's a little bit different from the syntax you might have used in Outlook to search for information, or Outlook web app. A little bit different from the syntax we used, say for instance, in Exchange 2010 and earlier versions. But keyword query language is not so different that it'll be difficult for you to understand it. It's actually quite easy. You know, here you can see we're looking for the term executive briefing. It's in quotes, so we want to find that exact phrase. Here we're looking for executive briefing and summary, so 2 specific phrases. We can also search on file names or partial file names and file types, and we can do proximity searching as well. So this is say, show me any content that contains the word executive within 20 words of the word briefing. So very, very powerful types of searching that we simply didn't have available before in previous versions of search. Another example, we have a feature in Exchange that's now been spread across the suite called Data Loss Prevention, or DLP for short. DLP is designed to look for content that is what we call a sensitive information type, like a credit card number, a passport number, a driver's license number, a health ID, some sort of data that is personally identifiable information. So what we've done here is we've exposed that sensitive content information types into the search language. So as an example, find me any content that contains a credit card number, or any content that contains 5 or more credit card numbers, or content that contains between 10 and 100 credit card numbers, or just as another example, show me any content that has an international banking account number that is also visible by external users. So in other words, if I took an IBAN number and emailed it out of my organization to somebody on the internet, that content would be in my sent items folder, and then that would appear in the search results here. So this is something new that we've done, and we'll continue to add more sensitive information types into both DLP and the search and eDiscovery experience as well. Okay, so let's talk about how we do things at Microsoft. And the reason I'm doing that in this session is because we use our own tools. Okay, so the same tools that I'm describing within Office 365 are the same tools that Microsoft's own legal and corporate affairs team, our lawyers, it's the same tools that they use for eDiscovery as well. There is one difference, though. These 2 parts of the process we do in-house. The rest of it we outsource to outside counsel. We do it that way simply because it works better for us. Not every company is going to split it up half and half this way. We just happen to do it this way. But again, we still follow the same process, and we're still using those same tools. So there's 2 things that we're concerned with from an in-house counsel. One would be the identify and preserve. The other would be the process and search. So we have the internal Microsoft lawyers do the initial searches. They get the discovery request, and they respond to it by starting their search and investigation. And the search and investigation also includes preservation of the data through hold. Again, I mentioned earlier, if you're hit with a subpoena or a discovery request and you delete data that should have been provided, you can get in a lot of trouble for that, even if it was an accident. And so we're very careful about not just searching for the data, but also preserving it. But also preserving it in a way that it doesn't disrupt the business. We don't want to interfere with the information workers. We don't want to interfere with the administrators. We want this to be as seamless and as transparent as possible so that the compliance officers and eDiscovery officers can do their job without affecting productivity, causing downtime, et cetera, et cetera. So I mentioned the second part. We don't send anything out here until we've gone through and processed the data that we've reviewed. So let me give you some statistics. So this is from a couple years ago when we first started using these tools in Office 365. During those fiscal years from 2011 to 2013, we had about 68 cases that had active eDiscovery investigations going on. When we started, there were 45 people that had to be put on legal hold, and that was about 1.3 terabytes of data. As we searched, and this was the initial internal search, it turns out of those 45 people, we only needed to search the data of 13 of them. And out of that 1.3 terabytes, that only meant about 290 gigabytes worth of data. So our lawyers culled that down, and then they sent it to the outside counsel for review. Outside counsel did a secondary review, and they found that really only 16.8 gigs of the data needed their review. And after their review was done, they ended up producing only 4 gigabytes of data, which really only worked out to like 250 pieces of actual paper once it was printed. So that's half of a ream of paper. So it's a very small amount of data that we were able to produce. Even though we started with 1.3 terabytes, we ended up only producing just 4 gigabytes of data because that's what the lawyers and paralegals deemed relevant for us. Now, a couple more pieces of information. If we were to outsource the data, the searching and those first 2 stages, that would be about, per year, about $200 per gigabyte, or about $60,000 US per case, or roughly about $4 million a year. If we were to outsource everything. Remember, let me back up here. We only outsourced the second. The second the third and the fourth. If we were to outsource all 4, that's what I'm talking about. That's the cost savings I'm talking about. That's how much it would be. So because we don't outsource all 4, and we only outsource the culled data, in other words, the data that our lawyers have already made a pass-through, that means the caseload goes from about $60,000 a year to about $3,300 a year, and that saves us about $3.7 million a year. So in other words, instead of spending $4 million a year, we only outsource the second half of the phases, and that means we only spend about $200,000 a year on these cases. So again, we do use our own tools internally, and we have a tremendous cost savings that we can demonstrate as a result of that. Okay. Any questions on the eDiscovery side before we go on to archiving and hold? All right. So let's talk about archiving. So archiving may be a little confusing for you, but that's our fault because we're undergoing a terminology change. So historically, when we talked about archiving, we were really referring to this personal archive mailbox. Okay? That's a second mailbox that you can give to your users if, say, for instance, they reach the limit of their primary mailbox, or if they're also using an older laptop and they can't have a very large OST file. Really, the only difference between a primary mailbox and an archive mailbox is that the archive mailbox does not sync down to the OST file on the client. Otherwise, a mailbox is a mailbox is a mailbox. They're exactly the same. It's just a second mailbox, one that happens to not sync down to the client. But with Outlook 2013, that has this new thing called a sync slider, a little dial, if you will, that allows you to control how much data gets synced down to your OST file in Outlook. And so what that means is if you have an older laptop that can't have a very large OST file, you can use the slider in Outlook to tell it how much data to download. And it does it based on time range. So you can download everything, or maybe 2 years worth, or 1 year's worth, or 6 months, or 3 months, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't impair the experience. Search and everything still works seamlessly among downloaded versus not downloaded. So really, the only reason to deploy an archive mailbox then is really if your primary mailbox gets full. So in Office 365, there's a 50 gigabyte limitation on the mailbox. If you have users that need more, that's when you would deploy the archive mailbox to them. But the archive mailbox itself has really nothing to do with the new kind of archiving, which is what we call in-place archiving, or put slightly different, compliance archiving. Okay, so this would be preserving data immutably, not archiving in the sense of I'm just storing it somewhere else, but actually preserving the data immutably. So this would be the traditional approach where you've got the data stored in different places and you literally make a copy of all that data to store it in your compliance archive tool, and then you would do searches against that new repository. For us, we don't want you to have to move the data. We don't want you to have to double your storage by taking data that you have and moving it somewhere else just so you can search across it. So we keep the data where it lives, in Exchange, in SharePoint, in Skype, et cetera, anything that goes into these repositories can then become immutable through the in-place hold functionalities. Once something is on hold, a user can do all sorts of things to it, but the data still remains in the system. And by having it stay in all the workloads and using the same eDiscovery Center, that basically gives you a full and complete compliance scenario across the entire suite of Office 365. So compliance archiving, or what we call hold, so we're calling it hold in 2013 in the current wave of Office 365, but in the next wave of Office 365 and in, say for example, Exchange Server 2016, this will be called compliance archiving. But it's really based on the holds, the different types of hold technology that we have. So one is in-place hold. That's content just remaining in SharePoint, in your mailboxes, and being immutable. Again, less costs because you don't have to buy a third-party system to archive that information. You don't have to buy storage to duplicate the information. And you get that higher fidelity because everything is preserved in its native file format. So everything is exactly the way it is. We do also have the time and query-based hold. In other words, put a hold on this data, but only for a certain amount of time. So say, for instance, you've got a new litigation that you're working on. Maybe the litigation will last just a couple years, so you might want to put hold on for just a couple years. And then the query-based hold, that is there so when you're searching for data and you get your results set back, you can go ahead and put all of that content on hold right away, thereby searching for it and preserving it with one action instead of two actions. And again, the key is all of this has to be transparent to the end users. I mentioned that end users may or may not know that they're on hold. It's up to the organization or the administrator to let the end user know if they're on hold. And again, there's going to be some times, say for instance, your company's being sued by a former worker who is claiming sexual harassment by their boss. And so the boss, knowing this, may want to cover their tracks. Well, if you put the boss on hold, but the boss doesn't know about it, the boss could try to cover their tracks, but they will not be successful. And in fact, not only will they not be successful, but their attempt to cover their tracks will be captured and put in the system as well. So that's what we mean when we say transparent. Users don't know and don't have to know if they're on hold. You do have the ability to notify them, but they don't have to know that they're on hold. Okay, so how does Exchange Hold work? So a message comes in, goes into the user's mailbox just like it does today, and then it gets moved to the deleted items after the user deletes it. So the user decides that, you know what, this is an incriminating message. I need to purge it from the system. So they go into recover deleted items, and they go and delete it again, which purges the message from the system. Now, up until this point, everything is the same exact way it works today. But if the user is on hold, when they purge it, it's instead of going into the purges folder, it's then going to get preserved in the discovery hold folder. This is not a folder that is visible or accessible to the end user. At this point, once the data is in the discovery hold folder, it is only accessible via the eDiscovery tools. So again, that's through SharePoint, through Exchange, or through the Compliance Center. Yes, sir. So within Exchange, we already have database compression, so it will compress it. Keep in mind, though, that we are talking, even though this works in Exchange on premises, the focus of this is really Office 365, so it's cloud-based. So even though it's compressed, that's nothing you really need to worry about because that becomes our storage problem, not yours. And in fact, that's a common thing for customers is, I would like to move to the cloud, but, I may have to restore something that was deleted 7 years ago. How do I do that? Well, placing the data on hold is how you would do that, and then you would get it back through the eDiscovery tools. And when you place that data on hold, it doesn't count against your storage quota. So it's as if the data doesn't exist for you. Like I said, it becomes our storage problem. Okay, so this, again, is a significant difference. If the user's not on hold and they purge the message, it goes into the purges folder where after 30 days, the default deleted item retention policy expires, that thing is gone. Whereas here, when they delete it, after 30 days, assuming the hold is longer than that, it's still available here and accessible through the discovery tools. So big difference between hold and not hold. So SharePoint hold works a little different. In Exchange, we do the hold largely through transport because everything goes through transport in Exchange. There's nothing that can bypass transport from a content perspective. And so that becomes a kind of a choke point as to where we can apply hold and do things like that. For SharePoint, though, there's lots of different places where content could come from and go to. So there's not really a single choke point hold. So what we have is the user will modify or delete data. And then SharePoint runs a crawler. Okay? It's just automatically going in the background, checking to see if content has been modified since the user was put on hold. And it does that to figure out if it needs to preserve the data or don't preserve the data. And if this is the first modification that's made, a copy of the content is automatically saved to a library called the preservation library. The preservation library is similar to the discovery holds folder in people's mailboxes. This is simply where the SharePoint content that is on hold will live as long as it's needed in there. And then there's also another job that will periodically run to look for content that is no longer on hold. And if it's no longer on hold, it will remove it from the preservation library, and that data will be free to do whatever you want with it. Delete it, edit it, et cetera, et cetera. All right, whoops. There we go. Okay. So Skype for Business. So we use, in the case of Skype or Link, we're using service-side hold technologies. So what that means, it doesn't matter what Skype for Business client the user's using. They could be on their mobile phone, they could be on a laptop, on a desktop. Because everything is held on the service side, we capture everything. So meeting content, IMs, et cetera, et cetera. This is different from a user saying, save my conversation history in Outlook. This is a completely different thing, and it's irrespective of that. So it doesn't matter if a user has that feature turned on or not. Once the user's on hold for Link or Skype for Business, all of their stuff will remain on hold. Okay, so what will happen is, again, all modalities, no matter what Skype client they're using, Skype is actually going to use Exchange Web Services to take this data that needs to be preserved and write immutably, in some cases, right into their Exchange mailbox. And so you can see, for instance, here's the user's mailbox, and this is where the same data would appear in there. All right. All right, and then one last thing is when you have a user that is on hold in Link, their sync state is captured between Exchange and Skype for Business so that once the hold is removed from the Skype standpoint, all the data that's in the discovery holds portion of their mailbox that pertain to Skype would get purged. So for inactive users, they can be placed on hold as well. So the user gets placed on hold. Typical scenario is after they've been placed on hold, they leave the company. And in some cases, their AD account is deleted as well. But deleting the AD account does not delete the user's data. So even though the account is gone, and in the case of Office 365, the license is released and available for use by another user, the data is still preserved. Okay, and again, that's our storage problem. We'll handle that just fine. It doesn't cost you any extra because you've got a non-user entity's collection of data that's being preserved. That's not a problem for us. So the object is deleted. The license is released again, but the in-place hold remains. Okay, and it will be there unless and until, if it's time-based, the time expires, or if it's just a general hold until the administrator removes that. And at this point, though, the only way this data is accessible is through the eDiscovery tools. So again, the SharePoint eDiscovery Center, the new Compliance Center, or in the case of Exchange, just the discovery tools within Exchange. No, you don't. No. Because at this point, there won't be a username because it's been deleted. So you're basically just searching through the content at that point. And then, of course, like I said, the hold will remain and persist until it either expires because it's time-based or until the administrator lifts it. And then at that point, the data would be permanently deleted from the system because it would not be associated with a user at that point. So keep this one in mind because this does catch folks off guard sometimes. They'll search through the data, they'll get what they want, then they'll release the hold, and then they realize, oh no, I needed to do another search, but now the data's gone and it's too late for that. So typically what I recommend for folks is if you have any glimmer of a thought that you might need that data, just keep it on hold forever. It doesn't cost you anything. We'll persist it, we'll replicate it, we'll maintain it, and so forth. And this way, it's always around for you if you do need to do additional searches. Oops. There we go. Keeps flashing on and off. Okay. So a lot of the questions that we get is, why do you have two different forms of hold, one being the litigation hold and the other being the in-place hold? Well, the litigation hold is really the legacy, the first way we used to do that. And that's basically preserve someone's data indefinitely, preserve everything forever, if you will, versus the in-place hold, which you now have the ability to do preserving everything forever, but you also have the ability to do the time-based holds and the query-based holds as well. So that's really why we've got multiple forms of hold. Again, though, the word hold will be going away, and it will be replaced with the term compliance archiving. So you'll see in-place compliance archiving, or time-based archiving, or query-based archiving, and so forth. Okay. That's all the content I have. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, yeah, good. We still have a few minutes. I want to switch over and show you some demos here for the Discovery Center. So give me just a second here. And I will duplicate it in a moment. I just don't want them to see me log in. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I didn't want you to see that my password's all dots, so. Okay. So I'm going to go to the Admin Center, and then we can start in the Compliance Center. So the Compliance Center is new. I have the, 1 second here. So you can see down here it's under Admin. It says Compliance there. Now we are in the process of consolidating the compliance UI features from Exchange and SharePoint and so forth into this one Compliance Center. Not everything is done there. There will be some auditing and logging that's coming. There will be some mobile device management stuff that's coming. But until they show up in the Compliance Center, you can simply access them through the UIs that we have today. But we don't want you to have to jump around from place to place to place to do kind of the same stuff. So we are in the middle of consolidating stuff. So one thing that you can see here is eDiscovery. And so this takes us to the eDiscovery cases, and there's a bunch that we have. I could click this link right here that says go to the eDiscovery Center for advanced options. That would take me right to the SharePoint eDiscovery Center where I would have all of those features available. But I can just literally open up one of these right now and show you what one of those cases looks like from a case management perspective. These are a bunch of demo cases that we have created. There's two pieces of functionality here. One is the eDiscovery set that's doing identify and hold, and then the other is a search and export. So both functions allow you to do the same search, and both functions also allow you to put the data that is in your search results on hold. But the search and export also allows you to export the data and get reports out of it as well. So let me start with a new eDiscovery set. And it's really easy to create one. I give it a name. This could be the case name. I'll call it Contoso Litigation. And the sources are, what data do you want to search? You know, what mailboxes do you want to search? What SharePoint folders or URLs or file shares do you want to search? So I can just type in some names here. And you can see I've got a couple options here. One is the person with the checkbox, and the other is the address book. I could browse the gal if I didn't know how to use a person, if I didn't know how to spell their name. That's what the address book is there for. Or I could simply just click on this to check and resolve the name as well, just like the check recipient feature in Outlook. Yes, sir. You would have to pick, you'd have to use the address book icon, and then you would have to basically select all of the names, out of that. I would think generally, though, since we're talking about eDiscovery requests, the compliance officer could get with some of the other folks, maybe folks in HR or even some of the managers, to find out, you know, if I were searching for stuff related to the Contoso project, you know, tell me who works on that project. Give me the list of names, and those are the names I would plug in. So it shouldn't be too difficult to figure out where to search. So I can keep adding names, and you can see there's a line for an additional mailbox. We give you 3 to start with, but you can just keep clicking that and adding name after name after name. I'll just add a couple names here. And now I need to do my search, and my search could be, since this is the Contoso litigation, I'll just search for the word Contoso. And here you can see I can do things like start date, end date, the sender, the author of the content, and then for Exchange, if I'm searching mailboxes, the SMTP domains that I want to search on. Now you may notice here that there's no search button. If we look all over the screen, where do I search? Well, we actually want you to click Get Statistics at this point. And when you click Get Statistics, it's now actually executing the search. So it's searching Sarah's and Garth's mailbox for the word Contoso. And the statistics that come back are going to tell me how many instances or how many items contain that word, and then what is the size of each item, and then the total for both of those. And then while that's searching, I'll point out one other thing down here. Again, the in-place hold capability. So as I do the search, I can click Enable in-place hold and then click Save. And not only have I searched for the results, but I've also placed all of those results on hold. After it gets the statistics, yes. So at this point, you can see that there's a total of 56 items there for about 10 megabytes. And neither of them are on hold. So at this point, I would say Enable in-place hold and Save. Now, enabling in-place hold does not take immediate effect. It could actually be a couple hours before in-place hold will take effect. And that's why you see over here on the right, it says that 2 are processing. Eventually, it's going to say that there are 2 on hold with filter, the filter being my Contoso keyword. So we can come back to that. And then for search and export, It's not exactly 2 hours. It can take up to that long because there's a lot of stuff that it has to set up in the background to start preserving things. The point is, it's not going to be instantaneous. It's going to be a while. So this may be another reason that you don't tell a user that they're going to be placed on hold, because there's that small window between when you click the button and when hold takes place that gives them the opportunity to start permanently deleting stuff. And as I said, you don't want that for lots of reasons, least of which you can get into a lot of trouble with the court if that's found out. The query works exactly the same way as it did in the previous one. So that my query could be contoso lit. The query terms could still be contoso. I could change the sources. I could have advanced query options that show me additional ways of querying. So for instance, the deduplication. And I also can see the syntax that's being used as well. And down here, you do see the search button, so I can click on search to do this. And then once I've done this, here is all the list of items that match the search terms. So I could do something like select one of these items. And again, this is reinforcing that it's in place. This is actually loading up that item for me now in that user's mailbox with full fidelity, just like I was in Outlook web app using it for them. So I can see the whole mail message here. I can see the list of recipients. I can see the document. Okay, and I could click on the document and look at the document itself side by side in Word Online without ever having to leave the screen, just like the user could do themselves in Outlook web app. Okay, so again, mail items are stored in PST files. SharePoint items would be MHT, or those web archive files. Now I might want to export this data. And I do realize we're 2 minutes over, but I'm going to go through this very quickly. If you have to get up and leave, I totally understand. But if you want to stay, I'm just going to run through this real quickly to show you just a couple more things. Exporting the items is how I get them into a physical format that I could give to counsel for review. And here's where I have the ability to do deduplication of Exchange content, include versioning information for SharePoint documents if versioning is enabled, and if there's any items that are encrypted or in an unknown format that couldn't be indexed, I have the ability to include those as well. So I'm going to say OK to that, because everything looks fine the way it is. I didn't search SharePoint, so I don't need SharePoint sites. I click on OK. Okay, there we go. Okay, now there's two things that I can download. One is the results. That would be the actual items themselves, so the email items, the SharePoint items, and so forth. Or I can just download a report, which is the statistics about the search. It's not the data itself, so I'm going to do them both. Regardless of which one I do, there's a couple things that are going to happen every single time. The first thing is this .NET launch time application is going to run, so I need to run that. And once that gets downloaded and instantiated, then I'm going to need to authenticate a couple times. So I'm going to search for, it wants me to search for a location, you can see up here, but before I do that, I have to authenticate to Office 365 again. Which one is this? It's 15. Whoops. And then once that's authenticated, I can click on Browse, choose a location, say OK. And then before the data gets downloaded, I have to authenticate one more time. These are security mechanisms to make sure that if a compliance officer left their desktop open, no one's going to be able to start getting other people's data, because you have to keep putting in your information whenever you're downloading it. And that would be true if I got a report or the results. I'm going to get prompted over and over and over. And then once authentication is successful, everything will be packaged up and then stored where I chose to download it. So you can see it's preparing to download, and then eventually it will download that 10 megs of data, and it will show it to me. Now, the statistics for the report show things like what sources were searched, how many items would be returned, who ran the search, where the report was saved to, when the search was done, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, everything that you would want and need to know about these types of activity. So you can see it's completed up there. I can click close, go to my desktop. Here's the folder it created, and then here's the report that I get. If there are any errors in Exchange, that would show up here. There are none. I don't know why it goes on and off like that. Maybe it doesn't like the Office applications. Maybe that's it. If I'm looking at the Exchange results, let me just spread these out here so you can see what these look like. You do get a unique ID, but you can see you also get the subject, who it was to, who it was from, when it was sent, when it was received, and the size. Not the content itself, but metadata about it. And then the search results summary, that's that big report that tells you all of the information that you want to know, such as what case name, what's the URL, where was it exported to, who did it, when, and what sources were searched. Okay. And that's it. Any remaining questions? Okay. Well, if you think of any, either during the show or after, feel free to send them to me in email. It's just schnoll@microsoft.com, just my last name. And I'll do my best to get answers for you. So with that, thank you very much for coming. Sorry we went a little late, but it's really hard to do justice to this when you only have 45 minutes. So enjoy your lunch. Thank you.